Great. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Heather Navarro. I'm the Executive Director at Missouri Coalition for the Environment, coming to you live from Hahn State Park. Actually, not really, but it looks like it, which is wonderful, the beauty of technology. And we are here celebrating Earth Day, and I have two very, very special guests with me this morning. And I should mention that I am standing in right now for Cassandra Hage, who was the Executive Director of St. Louis Earth Day for 6 years until 2015. And she is now the Assistant Director of Washington University's Office of Sustainability. We are often confused for one another, which I take as the highest compliment. And she will hopefully be joining us here soon, but I am not Cassandra. But I will introduce our other panelists until she's able to join us. And this morning, we are very lucky to have Jean Ponzi, who produced the 20th anniversary Earth Day Fest in Forest Park. Her 30-plus year perspective draws on ongoing work for the Earthway Center of Missouri Botanical Garden, and her volunteer service producing and hosting the Enviro Conversations of KDHX Earthworms, which is a wonderful podcast if you can catch that anytime. I was going to say Monday nights, Jean, but it's a podcast, so it's available all the time now, which is wonderful. And Jean has also been the recipient of multiple awards from Missouri Coalition for the Environment because of just her dedication and her incredible contribution to the movement. And David Wilson is also with us. He was the Executive Director of the Missouri Coalition for the Environment from 1978 to 1980. He established the EcoAct Environmental Leadership Program at Missouri Botanical Garden. And from 1981 to 1986, he co-directed St. Louis Earth Day with his wife, Carla. Oh, I'm sorry, I think I'm getting these dates wrong. The EcoAct Environmental Leadership Program was 1981 to 1986 and co-directed St. Louis Earth Day with his wife, Carla Wilson, from 2000 to 2007. And he currently serves on the board of the Open Space Council of the St. Louis region and the Merrimack River Recreation Association. And I, again, am with Missouri Coalition for the Environment and have helped our organization celebrate its 50th anniversary last year. So I'm very excited to be with you this morning. And this panel today, we are going to be understanding the robust local history of environmentalism and how it has provided scaffolding for a more robust and impactful collaborations and impact and action in our present world. So how this event, how this movement that it has created has accelerated change. How it's built new leadership and how it's providing hope and perspective today. So we are very excited to learn from some of the history makers and keepers of Earth Day. And Cassandra's with us now, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
Hello, everyone, and thanks again for joining. Sorry, I had some technical difficulties at the start of the meeting, but hopefully I don't freeze up this time around. So I'm really excited to be on this panel of colleagues. They're folks that I've intersected with in a number of different ways over the past 10 or 15 years since I've re-entered the St. Louis scene in a professional capacity. And I've thought a lot about Earth Day and what it means for St. Louis and what it means in a more global context a lot when I was director of St. Louis Earth Day. And I think that this provides an opportunity, this conversation provides an opportunity to really to kind of learn from our past and to learn from if you will, our elders, and build on that going forward. So I know for a lot of the either younger folks coming into the scene or people who maybe aren't as familiar with the St. Louis context, it can be difficult to move forward without, you know, not rebuild things from scratch if you're not really familiar with the history and kind of what that means for our future moving forward. So with that said, I'm super excited to have this conversation. And the first question we're going to use to kind of set the scene is to think a little bit about the legislative history of some of the national things that were happening right around the first Earth Day and how that built momentum for us as a nation, but then specifically as a bi-state region. So for the panelists, what are some of the key legislative victories for environmental sustainability within the last 50 or so years? Who was involved and what made those victories possible?
Well, this is Jean Ponzi. I drawing a little bit on what Peter Raven said yesterday in one of the opening addresses to the virtual Earth Day celebration here in St. Louis. The first Earth Day in 1970, which originated in my home state, Wisconsin, the land of cheese. And I want to go on record here as saying that at that time I was in high school and I was completely clueless, not involved in anything political. I'm a good example of how a human being can get with the program anytime and then become a contributor. The conservatives in charge at that time, that was the Nixon administration. And out of leadership, think about that, conservation and conservative, there has been a connection between those two uses of the word. So out of the Nixon administration came humongous landmark legislation, the formation of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as a cabinet level agency, and the passage of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act, all of which continue to be, you know, they've been under attack lately, but they are some of the best hunks of legislation and regulatory safeguards in the world for environmental resources. So I put that in at the federal level, and then David and Heather, you know a lot more about what we're doing at the state level.
Well, at the state level, what was really interesting to me is that Missouri had some major successes early on in the 1970s, beginning in 1976 with an initiative petition to stop construction work in progress, which was a technical term for allowing electric utilities to charge customers for their electricity even before a plant was providing that electricity. And what that did was to greatly impact the incentives for electric utilities to build nuclear power plants. Union Electric at the time was going to build 4, but the 1976 vote by a coalition, led by a coalition of the Coalition for the Environment, Missouri Public Interest Research Group, and the Utility Consumer Council, organized a petition drive and then won the election with 66% of the people voting to disallow that effort. And instead of building 4 nuclear power plants, only 1 was built producing nuclear waste on the Missouri River. That same year, we had a great success with a referendum. About the same percentage, 66% of the people voted a 1/8 cent sales tax to support conservation, and the Conservation Department enabling them to buy and manage land across the state for hunting, fishing, and protection of unique and special habitat. And that's something that everybody is enjoying today as a result of that effort. 1978, another big win when voters in the eastern Missouri voted in an advisory referendum to halt construction of a dam on the Merrimack River, and became the first time that a project had actually begun construction to build a dam on a river and was stopped by the public. And again, 66% of the people voting in favor of halting the dam project, leaving the Merrimack a free-flowing river that it is today. And that same year, excuse me, led by unions, we had a victory in an effort to stop an initiative to pass right to work in the state. And a lot of the environmental community, as well as the labor unions, got behind that because we recognize that a lot of times in the environmental efforts, workers are the front line in terms of exposure to hazardous chemicals and that sort of thing. And you need a strong union force to provide opportunity for workers to be protected in the workplace. Again, 66% of the public voting for that. So it was a pretty heady time. It was a time when people were really, like Jean said, it wasn't such, the environment was a bipartisan issue.
Heather, can you talk a little bit about or expand on the like the MCE approach to some of these bipartisan initiatives?
Yes, and I'll pick up a little bit maybe I'm more familiar probably with the last 20 years of some of these legislative victories. And I also just kind of want to call out some of the legal victories too, because I think those really go hand in hand when you're trying to make systemic policy. Even if you get a law passed, doesn't mean that it's going to be enforced or complied with. And so that's been another aspect I think that MCE has been able to bring to this. And, you know, in 2005, when collaborating with the Environmental Law Clinic at Washington University, we were able to challenge the lead standards in air. And that actually had repercussions for the entire country because EPA had not been updating the ambient air quality standards for lead. And that was playing out in Herculaneum here in Missouri. And so that lawsuit ended up prompting EPA to update and strengthen those standards for the entire country. And then in 2008, I think another big win is the renewable energy standard, which was passed by a petition initiative. So statewide petition initiative calling for 15% of all energy from investor-owned utilities like Ameren to 15% of that energy to be sourced by renewable sources by 2021. And that passed overwhelmingly. There was little to no organized opposition, which was great to see, but then there's been a lot of follow-up in terms of enforcing that and making sure that the loopholes are closed up, making sure that everybody has access to the various rebates and the other pieces that came out of that piece of legislation. So that's, I think that's where MCE kind of fits into this is, Earth Day and a lot of the groundswell of interest and passion and dedication and energy and enthusiasm. MCE's kind of been there to help channel that into systemic change, whether that's a law needs to be written, we helped draft the state Superfund law, whether that's about watchdogging the Department of Natural Resources to make sure that water quality standards are in step with the guidance that's coming out of the EPA, those federal laws that Jean mentioned. And I think that's really important work, and that's why I've been really grateful to be there at MCE, to be there for that piece of the policy and legislative work.
I have to give a little shout out to some individuals, and this is going to be a theme for me in this presentation, is the power of individuals and individuals working together. I typed up a little thing in the chat about Kay Dry, our friend Kay Dry, and her contributions and her multiplier effect, helping other people be contributors to a really complex, really difficult issue like nuclear energy. The Missouri Coalition for the Missouri Department of Conservation, which was funded by that conservation sales tax and continues to be re-supported by that. Every once in a while, there's a threat that comes up to it in the state legislature, but that means that public support means that our state agency that oversees fish, forests, and wildlife, which includes native plants and works with municipal planners and works with ordinary community groups in so many ways, that is one of the models in the nation for a state level agency that oversees environmental resources. And, individuals that came out of that helped launch things like the Missouri Environmental Education Association, which is doing great work all around the state, and the Grow Native program, which emphasized and educated people about native plants and supported the growers of native plants. So many different things have come out of that. And conservation, MDC, is a partnership between what one would call the hook and bullet types, the fishing and hunting advocates, and the environmental advocates. And those partnerships, sometimes unlikely partnerships, very, very important theme to hear throughout this presentation about the impact of Earth Day.
Let me add also state parks, which are different from the conservation department here in Missouri. State parks are in the Department of Natural Resources. And the voters also, 1984, and then every 10 years since then, have voted a 1/10 sales tax to support state parks and soil and water conservation in the state. And again, that's a big partnership between the environmental community and primarily the farm community. So we do have a lot of examples here of people working and organizations working collaboratively for the benefit of everybody in the state. Getting this back to Earth Day a little bit too, when my wife Carla and I took on organizing the 30th anniversary of Earth Day for 2000, the theme that we put forth was, we're all in this together. We're all citizens of this wonderful planet. And if we can invite all citizens, all people, to celebrate life on Earth and the blessings that we have as Earthlings, the way our planet sustains us with clean air, clean water. Our feeling is, and I think many people who come to Earth, they come with that approach that, hey, this is a time to celebrate the abundance and diversity of life on Earth. And it's from those roots and the educational programs that flow out of that, that a lot of people make the connection initially and become involved, become engaged. So that's the value, I think, of having a St. Louis Earth Day festival and an organization that's focused on making that happen. Cassandra, maybe you can comment some on what it was like when you were directing it a few years after I.
Sure. You know, it was, I think one of the exciting things about the festival is that it becomes this opportunity for those interdisciplinary and cross-sectional conversations. So, you know, it is a fun event. So I think bringing people in where they are, and especially, you know, normally it'd be this first moment of spring. So the timing is really exciting, especially if you get a good weather day. So you have a very general cross-section of the St. Louis region of people who are just excited to get out and experience a fun event. But in addition to those sort of occasions where they'll come across something that they haven't learned before, or you know, take that information back home, the organizations that are participating also have the opportunity to interact. And so that was always really exciting to see what kind of relationships would stem from those types of interactions. And we under my time there, we definitely tried to continue the kind of big tent approach, where we really emphasize that everybody has a place at this table, and really challenging everyone to, at least for this day, to come together and agree that the outcome is essentially the same. We all want to have clean air to breathe and clean water to drink, and it's an absolute essential that everybody has access to those things. We all have, I think, different ideas about how to get there, but at least for this one day, it's this opportunity to come together and celebrate, and build the general public interest, so that when these opportunities come up in the ballot box, or to talk to our local leaders, we have a population of people who are ready to to tax themselves or to vote in somebody who also shares those values.
I think it's a real testament to the festival that whenever MCEs were filling out the form and trying to figure out like which section we want to be in, because the festival added the social responsibility category. I think is that social responsibility, social change category. And so, oh yeah, we definitely want to be there. And then there's also the farmers market section, and around food, there's such a connection between food and the environment. And MCEs started leading up the Food Policy Coalition, which has really brought in a diverse group of people from, urban growers to rural farmers, food advocates, food security advocates, restaurateurs. I mean, we've got, health advocates, food banks. I mean, everybody coming to that table. So then we think, oh, we want to be in the farmers market section. Oh, but then there's the nature section, which is kind of where, you're kind of the conservationists, the people who enjoy being outside, which we really connect with those people too. So there really is a place there. And I'll just mention too, at the same time, we're trying to figure out, oh my gosh, which section do we want to be in? And at times we've even, I think, just tried to split up because there's so much going on. And at the same time, we also do have this internal struggle with, okay, there is everybody at this festival, and we've often been on the opposite side of some of those people. And, how do we as an organization balance, kind of balance where we are in this kind of this system? And, we have this conversation every year. Are we going to go, you can look at who the sponsors are, you open it up to so many people. And at the end of the day, we decide, we need to be there. This is where people who care about the environment come together. And even if there's going to be somebody we've been on the other side of on this day, we're making space for everybody, and we're going to inform and give people as much information as they can get, from everybody who's there. And so I think it it has been a really wonderful way to build momentum. And definitely for us, I mean, we either have, it's a great day for us to get petition signatures. So it's hard being home right now this time of year when we're used to like, okay, we're going to get postcards signed, we're going to get signatures, we're going to get people registered to vote, you know, whatever it is. And right now being at home, you know, we're just really noting the absence of the festival. But so grateful that you're putting this on.
And pointing to that the issue you raised about addressing people who come and have a different perspective, that's another thing we really tried to do. In 2000, the St. Louis Earth Day Festival, we also put on a conference that brought Coalition for the Environment together with the business community to begin talking about areas of common interest and where can we collaborate for the 21st century. And we also then the next year, as we were focusing on water, reached out to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and arranged a barge trip so that people could see the Mississippi riverfront, the working river in St. Louis. And that was really interesting because left over from the 1970s, 30 years earlier, there was still this friction between, say, the environmentalists who had opposed the dam and the erstwhile Corps of Engineers. But in fact, that partnership led to great conversations and great partnerships for new projects moving forward to address local issues and concerns in a way that we couldn't have imagined if we hadn't had those one-on-one conversations.
So other kinds of interactions from 1990, I produced one Earth Day Festival. That was about as much as I could handle without getting too crabby, but I've been involved in them ever since. And my hat is off to David and Carla and Cassandra and the team at Earth Day 365 that, you know, people who have produced these festivals and really dealt with the logistics of them every single year. It's a lot of work. Jerry Clayman, Laura Newman, Elena Irwin all have produced Earth Day festivals. In 1990, which was the 20th anniversary of Earth Day, I was the event producer, the event coordinator there because I had done some little events like, you know, New Age festivals and some art related events. And I like doing that and I like to work a crowd. And that was a big year for Earth Day nationally, like this is a big year globally, 50th, that was the 20th. And there was a lot of generation of corporate support. We were criticized for being the corporate Earth Day. And my job, as you know, having the whole picture of the festival and how that was going, was to work with everybody who was contributing to that. And that really stretched me beyond my comfort zone. We had a PR committee that was headed up by a woman named Nardi Hobler, who was the head of PR for Venture Stores, a chain of discount department stores at that time. That was owned by the May Company. And Nardi recruited PR people from every major PR firm in town to take different beats and cover different stuff and get publicity for what was happening in Earth Day. My job was to inform all those PR professionals, and it scared the gizzard out of me. And it also really gave me the creeps because, you know, as an environmentalist, business is typically seen as the enemy. And we had to work together. When you're put together with somebody for a common goal, it's not like I didn't all of a sudden start wearing suits and ties and throw out my Birkenstocks, but we accomplished things together that we couldn't do otherwise. And we learned from one another and we actually shared values. And that kind of thing is still possible for human beings, and reclaiming the capacity, reclaiming the processes to do that. Tying back into legislation, Heather Navarro, when the Coalition for the Environment sued the Metropolitan Sewer District because of combined sewer overflows, discharging not effectively purified water because the storm sewers overflow the sanitary sewers when we have gully washer rains, you didn't just cash in on that. You got MSD to invest in rainscaping grants to use the power of plants to capture and hold stormwater, which has generated a whole new sector of business opportunity for the plant professionals that design and install and maintain those things. And gosh, hey, we're using the power of plants. And it still doesn't put the concrete guys out of work. When we work across those boundaries, we can accomplish things of ideology and, you know, who's on which side. Just like when the Missouri and the Illinois side of the region work together as one region with the 4th largest watershed in the world flowing through us, we can do things that we can't otherwise do. And that is so important for us to reclaim and put into action. Earth Day is a really good reminder of that.
And I think, Jean, what you highlighted there too is how important it is that for all of the different environmental groups to recognize that we have different roles to play in that. I think, you know, like the MSD lawsuit's a good example. Not every organization is going to feel like that it's their place to hold MSD accountable in the way that MCE did. So whether that's holding lawmakers accountable, whether that's holding polluters accountable, I think that what we recognize is you've got to have a whole spectrum of individuals and groups pushing on different levers to make change. So everything from, you know, we're going to take you to court, which is a very, very powerful tool, but it's part of a larger strategy of, okay, once we get to court and we get a consent decree, we've got to make sure that, you know, we've got the relationships there and intact to then move forward with, you know, carrying that out. So like Project Clear and all of the rainscaping and everything that came out of that consent decree. And I think that's one thing that's really important, and for all of us to recognize that different groups play different roles, and it doesn't mean that any one is better than the other. We need groups pulling tires out of streams and planting trees. We need groups that are educating kids about, you know, recycling and climate change. And then we need groups who are going to the Capitol and you know, it'd be really difficult for one group to be able to take on all of those different pieces. But when we act strategically and collaboratively together, that's when I think we really propel change forward. We propel all of us forward.
And that's really where Earth Day, St. Louis Earth Day has played a huge role in my mind. We organized in 2001 a conference that brought professionals who came at water issues from a variety of perspectives, and that included the Metropolitan Sewer District, the universities, the environmental organizations. And that was going on more or less the same time that the lawsuits were wending their ways along. And through that conference, I really believe that was the personal connections of professionals in different organizations who met each other and began to work together really fostered the relationships that Jean referred to in building rainscaping. So you have a partnership today between Missouri Botanical Garden and the Metropolitan Sewer District that is promoting plant-based solutions to stormwater management. And those kinds of things don't just happen without people talking to each other and communicating across professional disciplines. So you have engineers talking to botanists, talking to native plant specialists, to landscape architects. And the facilitation of that interaction is not easy, but it has to begin with people willing to come forward and say, you know what, we are in this together. We can work together.
So yesterday, Peter Raven referred to, you know, got to give a lot of good shout outs to the Big Bird, because he has been such a champion, and his leadership of an institution, major cultural institution, world respected institution, the Missouri Botanical Garden, to be a hub for things, to be a place to have the conversation. More institutions have been a part of that and, you know, working together. Earth Day started as a teach-in. Earth Day started so that people who, you know, more of the public would understand more about ecology. Ecology wasn't recognized as a science at that point. It was like a soft science. It was kind of like mush. We would have heard about it on, you know, I don't know, it would have been like DIY science or something. But understanding ecology, which is all about relationships and relationships in place and making them work, you start to understand things like, you know, you have predator and prey relationships, but wolves don't hate rabbits when they eat them. They eat them. Who do we eat? What do we eat? There are those cycles, you know, of use and giving and taking and generosity and reciprocity. And a big challenge, I think, of Earth Day today and it's fascinating that we're doing this digitally on the power of zeros and ones, is to get off that linear plane of thinking that you're on one side or the other side, you're right or you're wrong, and everybody else is wrong, and get together and collaborate. It's so potentially interesting and fun and productive and essential.
I saw the thumbs up there, thank you. So we touched a little bit on the educational side of things. So the role that education has played. I hear a lot of people when they say, like, you know, how are we going to address the environmental crises? They say, you know, teach the kids, start there, they'll take it home to their families. That's absolutely what we have to do. But, you know, we are also on this like very quickly narrowing timeline as well. So I'm curious, what have you guys seen over the last 50 years as far as educational opportunities, not just for like develop within the formal and informal, like pre-K through university curriculum, but then also some of the professional opportunities that are available to people who want to learn more about how to incorporate sustainability into their work? How has that changed?
Well, I'll jump briefly to say what's remarkable when I look back to the 1970s, the first Earth Day, there were virtually no environmental education programs at universities. There weren't any classes that one took in environmental science even. You were taking a natural resources class or you were studying biology. One of the rare exceptions was Barry Commoner, who in those days was at Washington University, had a Center for the Biology of Natural Systems. So it was actually looking at the ecology, the interrelationship of life on Earth. But even there wasn't an environmental studies degree that one could select as an undergraduate or graduate student. So we've come a long way just in terms of the fact that everywhere you go, almost any university now has a study in sustainability or environmental policy or environmental science that a lot of people study and then go into all kinds of different professional careers. And they're all over the place. They're in universities, but they're also in utilities and businesses and corporations. So there's an understanding that just didn't exist 50 years ago.
The sentiment that you have to teach the kids and the kids will teach their parents, that is a huge buck pass, in my opinion, from adults who are, you know, let's face it, adults hold most of the cards in the way things are done now. But the voices of the climate strikers, of 350.org, the group of 6 college students from Middlebury College, who launched the 350 awareness movement based on the number of parts per million the atmosphere can sustain of carbon dioxide concentration, Greta Thunberg's leadership, the young people who sued the US government because they're not taking action on climate change. That's where the oomph and the energy is. I am very happy to be an environmental elder and to be still contributing to this community and intend to contribute as long as I'm useful. But I don't have the same degree of energy that I do, and I don't have the same degree of fluency as the digital generation does to communicate all around the planet in a heartbeat. And, you know, we need all of that. And we who are the elders need to have better connections. I'd love to have a better networking capacity with younger people who are setting priorities and looking at doing things in a different way, looking at doing things that disrupt systems, like digital communication has disrupted a lot of systems, but doing that in a way that's not destructive. Disruption doesn't have to be destructive. And, you know, formal shout out to the Missouri Environmental Education Association, MEEA. You can find them at meea.org, was launched under the auspices of the Missouri Department of Conservation. We mentioned them earlier, is now led by a very energetic young woman named Leslie Moylan, with a board of directors that represents university professionals and classroom teachers and college students from across the state of Missouri, working to get environmental literacy formalized within our state curriculum. That's a That's a project. That's not going to be a quick fix, but it's something. But incorporating lessons and messages and understanding in the way we think and the way we teach. And at the heart of good environmental education is you don't tell somebody what to think and what to do. That's propaganda. As an environmental educator, my responsibility is to give you the best information I can and give you the best tools that I can to make your own decision and encourage you to make those decisions and keep learning and do that together. And how different is that from conventional didactic environmental education? And it can include social justice. It can include understandings about, colonizing patterns and how we change those. Those are all things that the Missouri Environmental Education is doing, working with adult professionals, emerging professionals, as well as kids.
When I think of education, I think, there's educating people, raising awareness, and then I think a lot about voter education and how our government systems work. And I think that's kind of where MCE's been spending a lot of time, and I've just seen how important it is, whether somebody sees an oil slick or they see illegal dumping, if they don't know how the systems work, if they don't know what department to call, if they don't know what their rights are, I see a lot of really passionate people, but not necessarily knowing, like, okay, where do I go with this? And I think that's the other step of education that's really important, making sure that people understand why it's important to vote, understanding where the candidates are on issues, understanding how Jefferson City works and how it doesn't work. What are the ways in which our government is making it possible for us to engage, and what are the ways that the government excludes certain people? I think all of that education is really critical too. And especially, we've got people often channel all their energy at the EPA when really the decision maker is somebody in local office who can fix their problem. So it's a lot of basic civics too that I think that we find that we end up teaching people that, we just aren't getting in our regular education about how do these different branches of government work. And I especially see this when it comes to litigation. People, oh my gosh, you file lawsuits. That's so adversarial. That's so contentious. And it's like, this is how our government was set up to work. If the EPA isn't doing what the EPA is supposed to do by law, then we have this other tool, this other branch of government to go to. And democracy is supposed to be a messy sort of process that takes a long time because you're involving a lot of people. You're making sure all of the voices are heard. And I think that sort of just general education is really helpful, again, in kind of channeling and harnessing our energy for the environment. Once you're kind of woken up to, there's a lot of really bad stuff going down. Where do you go with that next? And I think it's all of that education is really important.
And I'd just like to say there's been a lot great role played by St. Louis Earth Day 365, just even the creativity of finding a way to put together this Zoom conference and the celebration in a digital format this year is pretty great.
Yeah. So speaking of waking up, as Heather mentioned, I'd like to spend the last part of our conversation talking a little bit about the social side, the social evolution over the last 50 years. Our scope we're celebrating this 50 years of Earth Day, and that's part of why we're looking at this time frame. But it's painting a picture around what we would consider the modern environmentalism movement. And it doesn't really acknowledge the long history of indigenous people who have been fighting for true sustainability, and a long lineage of people who have fought for issues that maybe don't look like our traditional environmental issues of parks and preserving land, but are more deeply connected to human health issues. So what shifts have you seen over those past 50 years for who's at the table, who's weighing in, how environmental issues are defined as either environmental, social, or kind of a combination of environmental and social?
One thing, if I could just start by putting out there, I don't have the history, but one thing that I've really come to learn, and I appreciate, Cassandra, how you pointed out that the environmental movement that we're here to celebrate today is the one that essentially that we pin back to 50 years ago. And that has primarily been organized and led by white people. And that there have been a whole bunch of other groups of people, even, I mean, in recent times, past times, you know, brown and black communities that have been fighting environmental issues and leading causes for a long time. And I think one of the things that we're getting better at is telling a more comprehensive narrative. I think, you know, I grew up in the white-led environmental movement, and it was a conversation with, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting, Richard Louv with the nature deficit disorder. And there were educators in the audience, and there was an African-American teacher from University City, and she pointed out to me so clearly how, you know, in my tradition in the environmental movement, you know, I see this image of a large tree just with these overarching limbs over the prairie or a meadow, and, you know, I see birds, and I just think, oh, this is a beautiful, peaceful sign. And she said, you know, I see that, and I see a lynching tree. And that really changed everything for me in terms of how is the environmental movement that I'm a part of, how do we communicate? How do I talk about these issues? What are the issues that, you know, I'm a part of? What are the communities that I'm working with? And it really, for me, you know, that was the first time that it opened my eyes that yes, this movement is for everyone. Yet there's a lot of other work being done on the sidelines, and there's a lot of work that we could be doing collaboratively that we haven't been, because we just haven't been looking at it necessarily with a racial equity lens through all these years. So I do think that we are starting to put those pieces together. And I think part of it is opening up this narrative. And so even when we talk about, you know, like who's at the table, recognizing there are a lot of tables out there. We tend to talk about the table that we're at as the center table, and who are we bringing to the table? We being, again, the white-led environmental movement. Not to say that it's always been only white people by any means. But I would say in terms of who's been the primary leadership. And I think just opening that up, recognizing that the food injustice issue, that area has been, I think, really wonderful. We've seen a lot of great collaborations because we can see how land rights are very much tied to agriculture, which is tied to health, which is how we treat the land. All of those things, come together. And so that's one area that I think that's helping kind of break down some of the barriers and boundaries that I've seen in the environmental movement that I grew up in.
Jean, you want to chime in?
Sure. You know, when you're engaged in a process, and for me, green stuff, environmental focus, it's not where I came from. Absolutely not. My goal in life in my youth was to be a French horn player, and that was it. That was the only vision I had. Thank goodness for changes, mostly because I never practiced. But you know, when you find a niche that feeds your heart and feeds your soul, to be a contributor to your community, and ecological interaction can do that. It can do it from a variety of ways. But, you know, different people come to how our species, this is about our species on this planet at this time. And we're having this conversation on our laptops, in our libraries, in our homes, because a virus, a non-living organ, a thing, it's not even an organism, has given the entire human species time out. All at once. What can we learn from that? Where can we go from that? And, you know, what's your way in to doing it? For me, my way in has been stuff like, you know, in my background today, I'm in a virtual field of Virginia bluebells out in the woods. That is, as you said, Heather, that's one of the things that speaks to me. And people who come to, how are we humans going to be a functional, contributing, not destructive, not disruptive, mess-making species on this planet, people who come to that through more social justice can ignite interest in someone like myself that doesn't come from that. When I had Tasha Phoenix, the food justice organizer from the Coalition for the Environment, on my show Earthworms, having a conversation, the way in which Tasha articulated her care for the community spoke to me and spoke to my heart in a way of like, oh, check this out, Jean, you know, this might be something you might want to look at ways to contribute to in a way that other stuff hasn't. We had a conference recently that was organized by students in the horticulture program at St. Louis Community College at Merrimack. It was right before COVID-19 sequestered, right under the wire, about social justice in horticulture and in the green industry. And that was a way in for me because I'm interested in plants and I'm interested in that field, and that, like, you know, gets me excited. And so I could think about how to be a contributor and a collaborator in the human-centered spheres beyond the conventional, you know, stand around and hug the trees way that has been my way in. What you love becomes your way in, and acknowledging what you love and acknowledging that what we love as individuals is really important to understand for our connection to the planet. If there was ever an Earth Day to get that message across, it's this one, when we're all sitting in our little digital cocoons, sequestered, but still able to communicate with each other.
David, what do you think?
Well, I do want to bring up the idea that the Native American relationship to the land and the environment was so strong, and that's a valuable reference point for all Americans who love our liberty and love our freedom. The Native Americans understood that we are all interconnected, that we're part of a web of life, that we survive, we live in harmony with, or we live in disharmony with all of the life that's around us. And if we choose disharmony, it's going to hurt us because we are part of that web. So the sense of Earth as a living being, or the sense of the sacredness of all life, is so critical in my mind, tracing that back to the values of the native peoples in this land. And that's a value that I really hope we as Americans can integrate more fully into our lives as we look forward to the next 50 years.
So I'd also just like to add, you know, we talked a little bit about the youth showing up in the movement, and to me, so I work at Washington University now, so it's been really exciting to work with a lot of students, and what I'm seeing is that they get that it's not always an either or. So it's not that you have to focus on just the environment or just people, and they also get that like this deep inclusivity that that really transcends, I think, what a lot of folks that are, you know, slightly older, I guess, than college age understand. I think our generation, or my generation at least, is still on the early end of the learning curve. So that's one of the things that I think youth can really bring, is this vision of what could a new day look like? What will this look like when we come out on the other end of it? And they see it as something that is really drawing on equity at its core. So we don't have to, so for example, like the Green New Deal is super exciting for this vision that they're painting about jobs for everyone, healthcare for everyone, and ultimately that's part of the foundational solution for addressing climate change. So the degree to which we can paint a picture and a vision, not just of like all the problems that are out there, but of what a solution could look like that encompasses all of those different characteristics, and not having any one be at the expense of another. Super exciting.
Do I have time to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Another, oh, I was just going to say, I think the other thing that's really exciting that I've seen, and we do have a lot of interns, college students, grad students, high school students come through MCE, and you know, when I was growing up, I was labeled an environmentalist. You know, I was always harping on people to recycle, and you know, I loved Fern Gully. You know, that was the environmental flick at the time, and you know, all those things. And now when I'm interacting with college students, you know, they care about climate change. They are deeply concerned about water quality and environmental justice, and very few of them would label themselves an environmentalist. I mean, I remember being at a Department of Conservation conference, and there was a whole table of students, and they were very interested in careers and what I would call, you know, careers in the environment. But they didn't go around calling themselves environmentalists. And I think what's exciting about that is that all of these issues are now so ubiquitous. They're so baked in and connected to a whole range of things. If you care about affordable housing, if you love, your community garden, if you care about children being able to play on the playground without an asthma inhaler, you're kind of an environmentalist, whether you call it that or not. But we're all working towards these goals now, and it's not just this, this group of people, who love to hike and fish and canoe. There's so many more people who are now behind these issues and pushing in all sorts of places, all sorts of levers to try and change society. And I think climate change is, we're really, really seeing this. And I think that's one thing that we can be doing, those of us who consider ourselves environmentalists, is can be looking out for that. My interns are sometimes business students, they're medical students. They come from every range of discipline, even though there isn't a very strong environmental studies department at WashU, for example. The students are not, you don't have to be in that department to care about these issues and to be actively making change on them.
And we don't have to have every single human being on the planet Earth agree with this stuff or think about this stuff or care about this stuff. This is an advantage that we have. We need a critical mass. And the most diverse, the better diversity of that critical mass across areas of interest and areas of focus, the stronger that coalition, that critical mass will be, that partnership. David, you cited the ethics of the First Nations people, the indigenous people of this continent. And the, a sort of a universal prayer from that culture is all my relations. Just saying that, you're not asking anything, you're not promising anything. It's an affirmation. It's an appreciation of the fact that we are part of the circle of life. And I'm relieved that we don't all have to get with the program, because I'm not holding my breath that happens, but we have great strength in our St. Louis community and in the connections that we have beyond that. And once a year, whether we need it or not, online or out in Forest Park, we get to celebrate that, and we get to have a little hoop-de-doo, some of us with our dogs, some of us in our fairy regalia, some of us, marching along as dancing daffodils. We need that too. We need that fun and that joy of life to refresh our spirits and keep us going as citizens of Earth.
So we only have a couple more moments left, and I just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to do maybe like 1 to 2 sentences about key themes or key ideas that you would like to see people who are currently and in the near future active in this space keep in mind as they move forward. David, I'll start with you.
Okay, just remember, we are all in this together. We're citizens of our planet together, regardless of our race, color, ethnic origins. And if we ground ourselves in that understanding and that sense that Jean just mentioned of all my relations, I think we can heal a lot of the challenges that face us and move forward with loving understanding. And that's really the key going forward in my mind.
Heather.
Along that theme, I would say that, we're not alone, and to remember that we do have power. Whatever community you are a part of, you do have power. And, reaching out and finding other groups to collaborate and build on that power is, I think is the way forward.
Jean.
Nature is the great teacher. Nature and all the systems and all the communities and all the interactions there that make up the natural world, which we are a part of. We're one species on this planet, has been working it out, figuring it out for a long time. And I'm so very grateful that one of the things our species can do in a time when we're supposed to hole up and be in enforced time out is to go out of doors and connect with nature, finding ways for people to do that might not take solace in nature, bringing nature into our cities in ways that is integrated and welcoming and friendly and based on what people in neighborhoods say they want. That kind of work is wonderful work ahead of us. And as we look beyond the hole up that we're in right now into whatever circulating looks like next. Let's just keep that relationship and that partnership with nature and invite more of our fellow humans into that relationship in ways that, you know, with some sensitivity and love and appreciation and compassion and healing. We're going to need that for a while, and we're going to need that to keep our spirits strong going forward, to keep dealing with stuff like climate change and water quality and all that, when viruses maybe take a back seat.
My final comment is going to be a visual. I don't know if people can actually see this. It's a beautiful design that one of my students created, and it says, "Everything is connected to everything else." Barry Commoner, who, as David mentioned, was a WashU professor and part of the St. Louis community, and also considered one of the founders of the modern environmentalist movement. So big connection there, you know, originally said that. So I guess I'd just like to close by thanking everybody for this like wonderful conversation. Thank you to all the listeners out there, and hopefully we can continue to keep this live so we can continue to reach folks when they are ready to sit at the knee of 4 people coming from different perspectives and carry it forward. So with that, thank you all for your mentorship and partnership and collaboration.
Thank you, David and Jean. Cassandra,
Happy Earth Day.
Yes, and thank you Earth Day 365 for providing the platform for this. When we were talking in preparation for this panel, this point came up that you know, one of the reasons why we have such an impactful, long-standing Earth Day celebration is because we have this organization that's able to focus on it. So if it were to be just one organization like the coalition, they couldn't have everybody at the table because they wouldn't be kind of neutral grounds. And so Earth Day 365 really provides those neutral grounds and the logistical support behind all this. So would just like to say thank you for that that we have in our community, and let's continue to support it moving forward.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.